Hey friends, Kevin Inoue here from Fight Designer LLC. Haven't done any updates on this channel for a little while. There's some recent stuff over on the YouTube channel for those of you who are interested in theatrical firearms for movies or plays or things like that. Some cool stuff happening with the what I'm calling the spring blowback shell ejecting models becoming available. But what I really want to focus on today is I got my hands on a used sword by a maker who I've known about for ages, met briefly this last summer. But I hadn't actually played with any of his swords yet, and so we had a conversation on Facebook recently about whether or not he had to make compromises to make stage swords versus cutting swords versus historical recreations and things. What kind of compromises you had to make those work, to make them optimized for their job. And he had some pretty confident assertions, and I saw one of his swords pop up on eBay, and I said, well, let's find out. Without further ado, we have a review of a sword by Sterling Armory. So this is a great arming sword. This would have been great for the production of Robin Hood that I've rented swords to a month or so ago that I think they open soon. But, oh well, too late for that. But, you know, this is a great medieval cruciform sword. So it is a peened construction. I don't know if there's any kind of like internal welds or anything else. It does tend to mean you can't tighten it up. It does look like it has been repeened. I don't know if it was repeened or if it was just hammer marks from the original peening. They're still visible there. There's a little bit of haphazardness there to that makes me think that was maybe somebody else tightening it up after the fact. But if they did a good job, because it does ring pretty nicely. This rings about as well as either a welded one or one that is threaded and fully tightened up. So I gotta say that's pretty nice, and it feels pretty light in the hand. You know, compared to two different things. I'm gonna compare this to the Hanwei Practicals single hand and Tinker Line single hand medieval sword, because I think those are probably the best steel comparisons I can do right now. Now this has been used as, I believe, a stage blade, and there are some minor nicks in the edges. Seems to have held up fine. There's nothing unduly out of the ordinary here, just the normal kind of nicks and rollovers that you'd expect from people doing edge bashing in stage combat and stuff. Now this sword does have some taper. It's got some nice flex. It has a slightly longer grip than some of the other medieval swords, which is also going to help balance it out. I wouldn't really call this a bastard sword unless you got really small hands. I mean, yes, I could put a second hand up there, but it is a little short for a hand and a half, but a little longer than most single hands. And maybe that is a cheat for the balance, I don't know, because it does move that counterweight further out. The grip is just a leather wrap, as far as I can tell, that's glued on, not stitched. So some similarities to the Starfires in that sense, although without the wire added to it. The leather's a little nicer than the Starfires. The grip's maybe a little thin for my taste, but it's not bad. Definitely gives you control, and it's solid. It's not at all cushy, squishy, the way some leather can be. Nice finish on the guard, you know, simple construction. Nice grind work. Let's get a nice little triangle in there as it goes up. You can see some of the grind marks and where it maybe touched a little bit heavier on the sander, but not bad. But it is pointy, and this is my main thing I'm gonna have to change with this before I feel safe using it, let alone renting it out for someone else to use. This is way too pointy for a stage sword. I'm not sure. I don't know exactly what this was originally sold as. Again, I'm getting it secondhand. But to me, this is blunt enough for a stage blade and has obviously been used as one, but it is way too pointy to be safe. That is a pretty sharp tip on there. Yeah, so I'm just gonna have to round that off, which is also gonna make it a little bit shorter. So first, let's compare this to the Practical single hand. And I have a couple generations of this in stock, but this is probably fairly representative. So first impressions, the Practical single hand is heavier, but there's a couple reasons for that, and it's not just the blade thickness, it is also a longer blade, especially once I round this tip off a bit. We're gonna have, you know, several inches less reach on the Sterling Armory sword than we do on the Hanwei Practical hand and a half, and the pommel is also a few inches longer out. So the combination of shorter blade, longer grip, obviously that's gonna make it feel lighter. I don't mind. Most stages are kind of small, so I don't mind a shorter single hand sword in general. You know, even like I've had people use like the LS-28 sometimes. Like, these are fine, they're usable. Hanwei, one of the things they did to help get a little bit extra metal out on the side is these really deep 3 fullers on this. I think one of the other generations has 2 fullers, but deep fullers are one way you can cheat and get more mass for a thicker edge while still having a light enough, stiff enough blade. The extreme of that being like the old Atrim I-beam trainers, where it's shaped like an I-beam, so all the mass moved out to the sides. I don't know that that's necessary. It does mean that this is a stiffer blade. The Hanwei Practical is harder to flex because of those fullers. That's one of the things fullers do, is they make the blade stiffer. This one's definitely got some more flex to it, but it seems to spring back to true, so that's fine. Again, it's not wobbly. I'm not worried about it. Got a nice center here for percussion. That's not a bad place to be contacting your opponent's blade, but that's not a whole heck of a lot of reach. What is that, like 2 feet, if that? Whereas, yeah, we've got maybe another half a foot on the Hanwei Practical single hand. This definitely, the Sterling Armory definitely feels quicker and lighter in the hand, but again, it does cheat a little bit by being a shorter blade, having that taper, and having a longer grip, and putting that pommel further out. So if I want to compare it to a lighter, more historically accurate blade, let's compare it to a Tinker Line. So here's one of the Cas Tinker Line early medieval single hand swords that I did a custom hilt job on. And again, the blade is longer. In this case, the grip is about the same. I mean, the shape of the pommel means the mass is not out at the end, but very comparable proportions on the grip here. Blade thickness is pretty darn similar as well. Edge thickness looks very similar, maybe a tiny bit thinner on the Cas Tinker Line. And I know also when these came new, they were pretty squared off, but it looks like the Sterling Armory kind of was too. I'm not a big fan of square edges because they still have corners, like 90-degree corners. It's a blunt edge, but it's an edge. So I like to round them off a little bit, and I may do that with this one as well. Very similar feel. Both of these feel fairly light. Both have taper in both directions, distal taper and a tapered blade. The Tinker Line is a little whippier. Well, actually it's not, it just feels it. I think it's the length that makes it feel it. We definitely have center of percussion out further. That's at like face height here. This one is, yeah, like about here, so about shoulder height. So in terms of where you'd want to be hitting to have the most stable contact and not have a lot of kind of blade vibration going on, the effective reach of this is going to be a shorter blade, again, even before I round off the tip. I think these are a little too rounded, but again, these were designed for HEMA fencing and to be putting blunts over. So that's another option, of course, with the Tinker Line blades, is you can also just grind this edge off a little bit more, make it look a little less spatulate, and be a little bit shorter, and that might also lighten it up a bit. To me, the Tinker Line feel great, but they're a little borderline on how thin is too thin to still be stage blunt. This is a little bit more standard, I think. And then you get into things like BKS or Starfire, Rogue Steel. Those are more like industry standard, and they're a little beefier and rounder. And so I do think those are in some ways a little bit safer, but there's always a trade-off. Because if it's heavy, that's also more mass, harder to control. Would you rather be hit by a slightly blunter, slightly heavier thing, or a slightly lighter, slightly sharper thing? I mean, both suck. so there's that. Very similar. I mean, the Tinker Line, obviously it's the pommel nut is threaded, and so you can tighten these up and disassemble them, which is nice. Not gonna happen here. I believe Chris is, or at least was, based in Florida. And so I imagine that rust, I mean, every time I've rented swords to Florida, they've come back rusty, even if I know they were oiled before they were put away. So to me, I would think being down there, I'd want a sword I could take apart and clean out, so that if they got like some moisture under the leather or something, they're not just gonna start to rust out. I can't tell on this, I can't do maintenance on it. But, you know, at the moment at least, it's holding up just fine, and it's ringing better than this. A little bit deeper pitch, but again, it's a slightly thicker blade, I think. So, you know, I think it's a solid option. I don't think it's magic. I don't think it's doing anything that Other swords can't. It's just which compromises are you making, right? Where do you fall on that? How light and thin versus how thick? So by comparison, here's a Rogue Steel Bastard sword, and it is definitely a thicker blade. It's got more mass to it. It's got the rounded edge, but you know, actually it's not really fair to compare because it's a hand and a half. But it doesn't have the same, doesn't have any distal taper, I don't think. And just a very subtle taper. That's the tip. So the less taper is going to make these feel a little bit heavier, even if it was probably the same general proportions in terms of length and width of blade and size of grip. Next, the other one I could compare it to if I had it is the Purple Heart falchion, but that's being used by Robin Hood at the moment. So I do have to say, when I saw Chris first starting to produce these swords, they looked like a beginner's effort. Like I'm sure they were solid. They were great tools for stage combat, but they looked like someone doing stock removal with stock parts, and they still looked very kind of generic. You know, like someone designed them on a CAD CAM program using very basic shapes. And they've gotten much better. So, I mean, and this isn't even obviously his newest work if someone's selling it used. He's gotten much better at both the aesthetics and the functional engineering of creating the balance. I mean, sword making in general has just come so long so far since then. You know, think back to the 80s when stage combat was, you know, Starfire swords was where it was at. And now you look at it and you're like, oh, these are crowbars. They still sound great, and they're still solid, but they're crowbars, and they feel really not sword-like in the hand. So I'm so glad that we have so many more smiths producing good work from across the United States, across Europe. I can't keep up anymore on all the cool people making great stuff, let alone afford to buy all of it. I mean, I'd love to have a Jesse Belsky piece, for example, at some point. I can't afford his work right now. But, you know, I'm always glad to get a chance to experience somebody else's work and try new things and see how they hold up. The latter will have to wait, but I do have stage combat class. I'll have my first one of the semester in about 2 hours. So I'm gonna pack this up, go get ready for class, and post the video when I get a chance. So till next time, stay safe. Don't do anything stupid with things like this. They can hurt. But have fun, train, look good, take care of your partners, stay safe, stay sane, stay healthy, and I'll see you next time.